But what I would like to do
With
is
conditions, though, remember.
with conditions, yes, ma'am. But what I would like to do is kind of maybe open it up, maybe start with you, Dr. Kelly, and go through the board and have a discussion on where we feel you would like to lead us, and myself as well, with masks, and whether we need to generate a policy or whether we stay with strongly encouraging where social distancing can't be maintained. So I'd kind of open that up.
Sure. I don't mind starting that discussion. As I said before, I hold in high regard Dr. Chapman and any professional from the CDC or the World Health Organization or any other healthcare official that we lean into in any time we have a pandemic of this proportion. So with that being said, I have said many times over that I would like to, first of all, put in perspective that as a school district, and having spent almost 40 years in the realm of education here and in other districts, I know that we require many other things as far as school supplies. Calculators, rulers, pens, pencils, markers. Some classrooms require specific types of pen, pencils, markers. So I was just thinking that perhaps we could have a mask after we provide them, of course, starting out, to be on the person, on the student at all times, whether it's in their pencil bag, their binder, their backpack, however they want to keep them. It's on their person with their other school supplies. And then, as I said before, I'd like our teachers to have some prerogative over whether or not they feel the mask is required or mandated in their classroom. We have some classrooms and some teachers for whom it would be appropriate, I think, most of the time. For instance, I think of myself when I taught language arts. If I am doing lecture discussion from my podium or from the front of the room and my student desks don't start until 7 or 8 feet out, I might not think it's appropriate for them to have a mask on. But if I am having them in a small group and I'm going to be leaning over them, I might want them to be masked, and I might want to have my own mask on as well to protect my students and to protect myself. I also think that they should be worn in situations where we can't social distance, certainly on the bus, certainly in the hall, until we get the pandemic under control, until Dr. Chapman and others tell us that we've flattened the curve enough or the percentages have gone down enough that we can eliminate these. I don't think that any of us wants to put a mask mandate in place forever and eternity, just until our professionals in the field tell us that we've done our due diligence and we've gotten this thing under control. The other thing I think of, to your point about discipline, I certainly appreciate Josh coming forward with that. That's definitely a point of my concern too. Having been a trainer of principals for many years now, I feel like that all of our good principals know how to create a climate and a culture in their building where it's not a punitive measure. It is more of a climate and an understanding that we build in our clientele, our students, our parents, our visitors to campus, that this is how we take care of each other. And I wear a mask to protect you. You wear one to protect me. In our society, our culture, in our school, we take care of each other. Just like if I see you drop your backpack, I'm going to pick it up and hand it to you. If my teacher drops her grade book, I'm going to pick it up for her. If someone has their arms full and they don't open the door, I'm going to open the door for them. It's the way that the climate is instilled from the top down. And I think simply that we don't have to say, and we train our faculty, not that I think we have droves of faculty that would be punitive with that, but we tell them this is how we will deal with it. You forgot your mask or you don't have one, let me offer you one today. Not, you're going to the office, don't come back to my classroom until you have your mask. I don't perceive that to be any kind of climate in any of our schools. I just think that we put it out there. You've used the terms care and compassion for over a year. I think that we put it out there, this is how we care for each other. We are compassionate people, and this is what we do until our professional medical leaders tell us that we no longer need to do this. So, I hope I've shared enough.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Vancheck?
Well, it's a difficult situation, but while I really respect what Dr. Kelly is saying, having spent my education career in a secondary situation on high school, my first thought, and I'm just kind of thinking this through, is that I know this for sure. I don't want the teacher to have to be, quote, the bad guy. I've worked in a situation where I've seen where maybe another teacher didn't follow a policy. I tried to enforce that policy in my classroom. I had to end up being the bad guy. So if we allow teachers to make the decision in their classroom, while I think that sounds good, and I certainly respect them as professionals, I think there would be, particularly on, like I said, my main experiences on the high school level, I think it would be sending such a mixed message. So third period, you don't have to have a mask, but when you show up in Missy Vancheck's class, you better have that mask. I think that sets up a problem. I do agree that we're not going to have to, hopefully, do this forever, so maybe we could start with a policy knowing that hopefully by doing that, we can drop that policy or ruling as we go along. Again, I certainly do respect our medical professionals, and Dr. Chapman says she is an advocate of masks. And I trust what she says. This is her expertise, and I trust her on that. So I think it's not whether I think the mask would be an important thing. It'd be how do we implement that ruling? Do we go with the great suggestion of Dr. Kelly and allow some leeway, or do we just, step up and just say
So they have it
we're
on
going
them all the time.
we're going to have the mask, and that's it's a tough. I understand what Mr. Morris is saying. He has a small child. I've not worked that much in that area, but I can imagine to have a child that small to keep a mask on, or the kindergarten teacher that's trying to keep masks on, it just really sends me, kind of with the chills. So that I'm eager to hear what my fellow board members have to say about that. And Mr. Morris, I appreciate you sent us some wonderful information. However, the problem it is on even professional information of this type is somebody else can send us the direct opposite. That is the challenge right now. Our own, like I said, Dr. Chapman, our own health person, is saying that yes, the masks are effective, even they don't have to be official or anything, that they do help. So I'm convinced a mask does help. From what I've seen, it's just that I think we're going to have to talk through how we're going to implement that. Thank you.
And just for clarification, so, because when this is all done, just making sure that I can understand, kind of where I need to go from here. But would you like to see some form of a requirement of some sort, or not?
You're asking me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Well, like I said, if we go with a requirement, okay, anytime you mandate something, then someone has to, quote, police it. All right, that puts a lot on our educators, I know. So that's the thing. Right now, the way you've said is that we strongly recommend. So, I can see that teacher saying, please get your mask on. And like Dr. Kelly said, doing it in not a get that mask on, but come on now, let's get the mask, that kind of thing. So that's why I'm hesitant to make it a mandate, because I hate to put that on those educators, one more thing to have to enforce.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. Yeah.
Mr. Destin?
Oh, I get to be next, huh?
Well, you could be the chairman and be last. That's-
Well, there you go. That's sometimes a good position. Tim.
Or first.
Yep. The medical professionals we have advising us from the CDC down including Dr. Chapman, who I have a great deal of respect for, are quite clear what they think about masks. They think it's essential, and I think they're right. So then we get to the question of how do we do it? At this time, we are strongly recommending. I'm not sure if we could say strongly. I am in a dilemma over how to mandate it without causing chaos in the schools, because what do we do with the kids who forgot it that day, who say, I'm not wearing it? Do we send them home? But there has to be some mechanism, and I hope that superintendent and his staff have given some thought how to put a little more teeth into it, and that's the direction we need to go. With all due respect to the teachers, and I've been with them my entire life, from my wife to my aunts to my mother-in-law to, I've been surrounded. Leaving the policy to them as individuals means we have no policy at all, because there are 1,000, 2,000, close to that. So we'd have 2,000 policies, so that's not really an option in my mind. But we need to do everything we can to have masks on kids at every opportunity that they can do it, because otherwise we are headed for a very short school system, a very short school year. As we all know, we already have a number of quarantines and positive tests in our system right now before we ever started. According to the figures I saw this morning, we're still hovering around an 8% infection rate percentage of those tested. We were at 12, 14, higher. But the CDC and Dr. Chapman say unless we're below 5%, that's a real problem. And so we are not below 5%. The barriers we're trying to put up will help. They're the closest thing we can do to cutting classes in half and go into split sessions, which we can't do. But the masks are vitally important. Without them, I don't see us being able to stay open very long. So I will rely on the superintendent and the geniuses that he has working for him to try to come up with some kind of policy that we think is reasonable, to try to put a little oomph behind strongly recommended. I know in speaking to the superintendent, he would like to get a little more input from the public. That's never a bad idea, but we know what the science tells us. We know what the right thing is to do. We need to protect those kids as much as we possibly can. That's our job. And so, that's where I stand on the issue.
Okay. Dr. White?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whenever confronted with these kinds of very difficult and challenging decisions, I always like to try to look at the source documents. And we all know that the executive order compelling us to open schools by August 31st, which of course we're going to do, also directs us to look at our local public health officials and their recommendations. And of course, in that case, that means that we look to what Dr. Chapman has to say. And I think it's fair to say that she has been unequivocal in her recommendation that we require masks in school. So with that, that's what I look to. I look at the source document, what it says, and it refers to her specifically. I'd also point out, unless things have changed, I believe our folks on the military installations are still requiring face coverings. I go a little further and say that when we talk about school governance, particularly in something like this, I think there's probably some responsibility and accompanied by perhaps even some liability. So with all that, I would be interested in seeing some draft language, some ideas that you might have worked up that I could take a look at for specifics to see if in fact that language might accommodate some of the kinds of issues that have been brought forward by my colleagues on this school board. So yes, I would be interested in seeing some language. Thank you, Chair.
All right. And I would just say that going into the schools now, I see how the schools are posting they're asking to have face covering, but it's not being mandated. It's just a request. And I think our school leaders set the precedent to how that school is going to operate. And I agree, keeping a mask on, as part of their daily, supplies. It's no different than me right now going into different businesses and all that. Not all businesses require masks, but the ones that do, I'll put the mask on. So I think looking forward, I think what we got in place right now is sufficient to us being able to operate without having to be, having teachers be the policemen, like Ms. Ivanchek said, having to be, you have one teacher that's implementing it and then another one that's not, but just giving the schools that ability to create that culture in their school. And I think like any of us, if we go into a school and you see the principal wearing a mask and their staff wearing a mask, I'll put the mask on. That's not an issue to me. But also you're going to have places where they can't social distance and, having a mask on, then that's not a problem there too. But, again, it is a double-edged sword that we're on right now. And I would too like to just see, I know you've already been talking to Mr. McInnes about some policies that other schools are doing, maybe not policies, but just some of the direction that they're going. So I think it would be fair just to kind of see what's going, what other districts might be doing. But I will sit here and say I'm not in favor of doing a mandate. I think what we're doing now is sufficient. I think but what I see, the leadership within the schools is strongly encouraging that, and I see people following that suit. So, and I think parents and teachers, or parents and students alike, would, when they go into a school and they see that, I think they will follow suit. So,
And I thank you all. And as we know, school starts on August 31st. We have a board meeting on Monday, and as I'm listening to all the conversation right now, if we were going to draft some form of a policy, I'm not sure it would be appropriate to put it on this Monday's agenda. We'd want to make sure that we give our parents, the community, enough time to think about this matter. We'd have the ability to have a meeting next week, if that's what you so choose.
Well, Mr. Chambers, I know Mr. McInnes and I have kind of talked about this, and because it is such an important issue, I think that you're right. We need to probably call an emergency meeting, and I would suggest that we call it for Wednesday. Okay. That way, that's plenty of time to get public notice, and that way people can come or call in. But that would be my recommendation, that we have an emergency meeting, which Mr. McInnes said that we can do. Mr. McInnes?
Yes, sir. Both your policy and statute allow for emergency meetings, particularly when the issue deals with public health, safety, or welfare, and this clearly is part of that category. The chairman can call an emergency meeting, and we would give the best notice we can. There is not a mandatory notice time frame for the emergency meeting. You have to do the best you can within the emergency.
How soon can we see some draft language?
I believe I think it's possible to get some draft language probably by tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it would be my recommendation with this discussion that we have going on right now, that we call an emergency meeting. That way we can give ample time for the public to be able to come and address their concerns. And for this Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Do I have any comments about that?
Well, I support your recommendation.
Okay. Thank you.
And what we would do is, watching across the state the way that other boards have dealt with this issue, I would propose that we would bring to you a proposed emergency policy that would deal with face coverings in this pandemic. As you know, those policies on the emergency basis are valid for a 90-day period, and that would give some time to determine how that is working when the schools are open. We would need to start regular policy-making procedures before the end of that 90-day period, if that's what the board chose to do. So clearly adopting it as an emergency policy would be an interim measure, as some of you have spoken about, and then it could be evaluated, and the superintendent could bring recommendations back to you if it needed to be extended or revised or whatever. That could be done during that time frame before it would expire.
Okay.
I would strongly support that. It would not be fair or ethical to leave Mr. Chambers on the field by himself.
No. And I totally agree with you. I think
Yeah.
that's why we're here on the board, to represent the community and the schools as a whole, and to put Mr. Chambers out there to make this decision. I personally don't think it's fair to him, and that's why there's 5 of us.
Yep.
And we're the representatives to the community out there. So, okay, do we need to make a vote on this?
You can't vote on the workshop, but as I said.
Oh, that's
the
right.
chairman-
That's right.
The chairman can call the emergency meeting. and
Yes.
I take it that's what you've
Okay,
done.
yes, so we're going to call it for this Wednesday, 6 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chambers, so you indicated to Dr. White that you can have something drafted up by tomorrow, hopefully.
Yes, ma'am.
What, are you going to use what you've done you said you've done some polling with the employees and the public, and you're continuing to get that data?
So I did not say the public.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
But I've had numerous conversations with different parents, whether it be through email, whether it be through phone call, or whether it be even out just in the community. But definitely have had a lot of conversation as it pertains to masks, and I think as all you probably feel the same thing, and there's a certain percentage on one side,
Right.
a certain percentage on another. You know, a lot of time it's almost a 50-50 split. And I think we have to make the decision whether we believe that this is a public health issue, and can we accommodate what we need to accommodate with strongly encouraging versus a requirement. And so just so I have direction, I think in terms of a policy, I think what we're saying is we would look at some form of we're saying that we would look at some form of a requirement of masks, taking into account some of the concerns that you all brought forth today.
Okay, thank you. That's what you were going to base your determination on, so.
Okay. Dr. White, and then I have a question for
Okay.
Mr. Chambers too, so.
And it's my understanding that other school districts in Florida have made such a requirement. And so I would expect that you'll be looking to those other policies in other local school districts, and maybe even looking at the requirements on our military installations as to the language that you might choose to incorporate in the policy that thankfully you'll be getting to us tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Chambers, one final question. You were talking about 50-50 numbers and all that. At this point, what is the percentage of students that are actually going to be going back into brick and mortar? What is the percentage right now?
And Mr. Hort may have to help me a little bit. I think the last numbers, we were around 7,000 students, but that could have gone up a little
Okay,
bit.
so the percentage would be,
It's between 25 and 30% at this point in that range. And
that
we'll
are
continue-
not coming to
that-
school?
That are going to begin the year at My School Online.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right.
7,200 and change, and it's growing each day with new registrations and giving parents the option. That is one of the logistical pieces here, and so
Right.
obviously with some mass discussions, that could sway people,
Right.
and as you've heard,
Well,
one way or the other,
well, and-
which is a challenge.
Right.
We'll work to do everything we need to do.
well, and obviously 30% are keeping their kids at home for a reason. 70% are not. They're wanting them back in brick and mortar. And I think it's important to gauge that 70%, because those are the kids that are coming back to school. So I know it's a tough task to do, but those parents that are part of the 70%, we need to hear from you what your thoughts are. That's why we're going to call this emergency meeting, so we can hear your thoughts. Okay, thank you. All right, any other things regarding COVID, Mr. Chambers?
No, sir, I just, I appreciate this discussion, and I do want to say I appreciate, and this will be very quick, this entire group that's out here today, in terms of just once again, the work that's being done to get ready for the start of school, and the work of our principals and assistant principals, especially on the master schedules. This is a monumental task when you're talking about the online versus in the school building. And as families come in, the online number might rise, which then might change a teacher's what they're teaching, or it might call for another teacher to be added to the online. So it is a monumental task, but they are doing a fantastic job, a lot of hours, just once again. And there's so much more than just the master schedule, but this is just one example of the hard work that's going on right now.
All right. Yes, sir.
Regarding the special meeting.
Yes.
I have one other request,
Okay.
if possible, and
Yes,
it's
sir.
not something that
No.
has to be done, and Superintendent, please use your own discretion. But following up on Mr. Destin's remark about incidences or cases of COVID-19 in the school district at this very moment, Dr. Chapman has provided us evidence or information regarding those cases, and I know that your team and Mrs. Schroeder is paying close attention to all of that, and so I'm wondering if an update might be relevant to this discussion regarding whether or not we should ask students to be required to wear masks in schools. I think, quite frankly, members of the public might be surprised to know the information that we all receive, even though it's public information. It's not something that I think is often widely disseminated, but it might be information that the public might wish to know.
No, absolutely, and if it's okay with you, what we can do is get Ms. Schroeder. We can make sure that she's here on Monday,
Right.
and she can give a very specific update on that.
Okay. Is that sufficient, Mr.
And
Dr.?
employees, by the way.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring out, both the employees and the student cases.
Right.
Yeah, and I would strongly support that because, as I alluded, we know we already have an issue before we've ever started. So that should factor into the decision pretty strongly. Dr. White is exactly right.
Absolutely.
All right.
We can do that.
Is that good, Dr. White? Okay. All right, so let's move on down to the consent agenda, and we're at 8.1. And again, school board members, just stop me at any time if you want to ask a question or comment about any item on the consent agenda. So 8.1 will be the approval of the consent agenda. 8.2 will be approval of the minutes of the workshop meeting of August 6th, 2020, minutes of regular meeting of August 10th of 2020. 8.3, budget amendment number 10, fiscal year 2019 through 2020. 8.4, monthly financial statement for June 2020. 8.5, invoices to be approved for payment. 8.6, school donations. 8.7, payroll warrant register and accounts payable warrant register for July 2020 totaling $9,068,597.53. 8.8, emergency purchase of accelerated student workbooks. 8.9, request for price increase of ITB 18-07 custodial equipment and repair services district-wide. 8.10, renewal of ITB 20-03 petroleum products and antifreeze. 8.11, exempted purchase over $25,000 N2Y LLC. 8.12, exempted purchase over $25,000 Beacon Educator. 8.13, service agreement number 21-44 Gabriella Lako Mitchell. 8.14, service agreement number 21-45 Denise Dechari. 8.15, amendment to services agreement with Field Print. 8.16, Okaloosa County School District bus routes for 2020 through 2021 school year. 8.17, School to Work contracts between the School Board of Okaloosa County and School to Work providers to provide career experience opportunities to eligible students at Silver Sand School. 8.18, agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Comprehensive Head Start, submitted by Heather Willis Doxey. 8.19, Triumph Gulf Coast pre-application for increasing technology capacity in CTE labs. And this was the added item, 8.20, request closure of Riverside's elementary school child care program. And since this is a school that affects in my area, I was hoping that we could maybe have somebody come up and talk about what the changes are. I believe this is, we're going to be going into a contract with the Boys and Girls Club and how that affects how we operate childcare, because this is obviously the first one that we're doing this with, so.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Just on behalf of Ms. Curley, who has been instrumental in working with the Boys and Girls Club of the Emerald Coast to make sure that those students continue to have childcare. She has basically transitioned the childcare services from the district over to the Boys and Girls Club under their auspices, and it's a good situation for her because she'll be able to have a good, worthy, and pre-established program on her campus to facilitate the continuity of the program, and also be able to focus more on the things that she wants to focus on with regard to her specific school needs. And with regard to the displaced employees, we're working with them right now to make sure that they fit into the right jobs that they have. We have plenty of opportunity for them to fulfill roles within the district, and we're working with them right now to make sure that they have their positions.
Okay. So with this being in place, how does this affect, because typically daycares that we operate are revenue generating entities, so how will this affect? Obviously, we're not going to be making, is the school going to be making anything off of this?
They
Will
will. There is. I don't know the specifics of the specific revenue, but I know that it's not a zero impact in terms of that. They're not just kind of giving away the child care services. There's a
Right.
deal between Boys and Girls Club and Riverside to continue to generate revenue through that program for the school.
Okay. And I think there's 3 employees that will be affected by this, and if I'm understanding, one is
2.
retiring.
Yeah, one's retiring, and we're working on placing 2 right
Okay.
now.
So anytime that we have an entity like a Boys and Girls Club that comes in to run, something that we've been doing for, Riverside for many years, I think the one concern that I have is the oversight, and especially it being on school property. And the Boys and Girls Club is a respectable, entity, but what kind of oversight will we have over that particular program?
Well, the oversight with regard to the program itself is handled through the facilities agreements and the whatever the transition agreement is that they sign between themselves. The employees and the students are actually under the auspices of the Boys and Girls Club.
Okay.
So they're the ones with the oversight there, and then they, as an entity, have to answer to the school district with regard to the facilities and ensuring that all of our policies are complied with and things like that. So in the day-to-day operations, it's basically a rental agreement with the
Okay.
Boys and Girls Club.
Well, and that was going to be the why I was asking that, because let's face it, the principal is the face of that school, and even though they're not overseeing that operation, Ms. Curley will probably be the first one that will get a call regarding any issues over there. And like Ms. Ivanchek said, earlier about being the bad guy, when you're enforcing a policy or anything like that, this would be on Ms. Curley. So I'm hoping that there is some division there, but also where Ms. Curley does have at least some oversight to a point.
There's absolutely that understanding with Ms. Curley, and as I said prior to that, the leadership of the Boys and Girls Club, specifically Mr. Rasa, who has been integral in this communication with Ms. Curley, has given her every assurance that they will handle what they need to handle, but Ms. Curley very much relies on them, as she does understand that she's the face of it. And like I said, from the district perspective, we're fortunate that this is not the first school that the Boys and Girls Club has gone into. This is more or less a plug-and-play situation for them because they have lots of different clubs within our school district already, so there's a high degree of comfort there with Ms. Curley.
Okay.
How
So-
many students are being impacted?
I'm not sure about that.
It's like
And as Ms. Lightbourne,
75, I think.
as
think
Ms.
they have up to
Lightbourne comes up,
75.
Okay.
I do think it's, and you all may know this already, but so the Boys and Girls Club right now operates at Destin Elementary as well as Kenwood, and then those are two off the top of my head. And
Was Shalimar part of that too? Was Shalimar?
No.
No? Okay.
Right now, the way it was operating, they could handle 80 students. With the Boys and Girls Club, they'll be able to handle 200. So they'll actually be able to have a larger population and serve more students in this situation. And also, it will help the Title I population as well, as far as them being able to use the Early Coalition to have a discount for daycare as well. So it's a positive on the student side,
And-
absolutely.
And since you said that, I was going to ask, because Crestview is dependent on a lot of daycare, and we do have 3 schools up there that offer the daycare, but the other schools that don't, will they be able to participate in this at Riverside, since there is more of a capacity, if they can get their kids to?
I mean, I would think, of course, Riverside would have, Riverside students would
Right.
have first opportunity.
Right.
And if 200, if they don't max out at 200,
Right.
I would assume if they could get their students there, but I think that would be a challenge.
Right.
For before and after school, because then they'd have to also get them to school
Right.
after they drop them off to
True.
daycare before school. So I think that might be a challenge, but I'm sure if they, if there was room that they
Right.
would work through that.
But this might be something in the future we can partner with the Boys and Girls Club at other schools, not just necessarily in Crestview, but throughout the district. That
Yeah, and like we said, we do have them at Destin Elementary and at Kenwood,
Okay.
and they've been doing a good job. Also, Ms. Curley wanted me to mention that the Boys and Girls Club is also planning on some enhancements to their campus security at no expense to the school, so they're putting keypads and door locks in as well. So they're doing some extra things as well, so I think it's a win-win for everyone.
Okay.
And so, Ms. Lightbourne, and Mr. Bryant, you may know this as well, is this the recommendation of the school principal?
Yes,
She
yes,
wrote
Ms. Curley.
absolutely.
We
Mhm.
have her letter.
Yeah.
I figured it was, just for the record, and we all know they're a fine organization. I'm sure they have their own internal background check system, but as a contractor on our schools, they would also have to comply with ours. Is that correct?
I believe so,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
yes.
can speak to that.
Yeah, Doctor.
The agreement that's in place for this program requires the level 2 background screening of all the
Good.
employees. It clearly sets out that they are supervising and responsible for the employees they put there. They have to maintain insurance coverages while they're on the property, so all those matters are covered in their facility agreement.
Good deal.
And I've talked with Ms. Curley, and she's wholeheartedly behind this. I just had some questions I just wanted clarified, just to be answered, so the public would know how we were going to go about this. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll move down to Superintendent's Human Resource recommendations, and we're 9.1, employees on administrative leave. 9.2, deferred retirement option program, the DROP. 9.3, cleared certification requirements and issuance of contracts for the 2020 through 2021 school year. 9.4, out-of-field report for the 2020-2021 school year. 9.5, department restructure. 9.6, employment separations. 9.7, personnel recommendations. 9.8, employee transfers. 9.9, instructional evaluation system 2020 through 2021.
Chairman,
Yes.
just one question, and Dr. Hale, I think, probably could tell us this. Is there any big changes here in relation to what we've done in the past?
Are we speaking of the evaluation
Right.
system? Primarily, the only things that have been done to the evaluation system through TEC this year is to change the online progress monitoring software to update that. That language has been updated in there. And there's also the addition of the My School Online option in there. But basically, the language remains essentially the same.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
But I have a question on that. I'm looking at this, I'm showing where the
An
student
assessment.
measurement is switched from, is gone to iReady?
Already.
Correct,
I saw
that's the
that.
progress monitoring piece that I was
Okay.
speaking of.
And then also I noticed there was something where it changed from, and I don't know if it was just language, when it said something between formative and formal. You know what I'm talking about on that?
Yes, yes, the formative piece, there's a,
Form means before and then and formal, so are you, is this saying it's not the formal evaluation, or
okay,
can you
so.
clarify that?
So I may have to defer to Ms. Peak. I may have to have her contact you back with some specifics with regard to that. But I
Okay.
know there's been some practical change with regard to informal versus formal observations over the years. And so I think that this language is to just update the current practice that the TEC came up with. But I'll have Ms. Peak reach out specifically to you to answer that question because I don't have a better answer than
It
that
may
right
just
now.
be just semantics, language there.
Correct.
I'll
Yes,
get with her.
ma'am.
Thank
But I know
you.
in practice it's basically the same.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. So 9.10, reinstatement, reimbursement of sick leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination. And 9.11, leave without pay.
And Mr. Chairman, I have a question regarding HR, and I can ask it now, or
Yes,
if you
sir.
would prefer, I can ask it under my business.
Let's go ahead and do it now.
All right. Dr. Hell, I was curious if you might share with us and members of the public how we are faring with the placement of our instructors, teachers, and faculty and staff that may be at risk as defined by the governor's executive order for COVID-19. And maybe you could give us an update on those employees and their placement and maybe how that's working out. And if you're not prepared, you can do it another
No,
time.
I can speak generally, and I know that Mr. Horton may be able to help me with some specifics if it's necessary, but I can tell you that the process as we transitioned into My School Online, the first thing that we did was we asked employees to notify us of any high-risk condition through the HR office because we didn't necessarily want to violate HIPAA with regard to school types of information and transition like that. So we were given a roster of teachers who had documented high-risk concerns. And so when we were doing My School Online placements, the first group that we ensured had online opportunities through telework was those high-risk employees. And I believe that we have 100% of them placed in a telework environment as of last week. And there may be one or two that we're still working on, but there was a significant number of teachers who requested telework and cited high-risk status, and so we worked with them first, and there was a lot of negotiation between principals on who would cover this class and who would cover that class. We actually got everybody in the same room together to make sure that we were able to take care of those employees first. So as the numbers with the students continued to change, we had to have ongoing, and we continue to have ongoing not concerns, but conversations about, okay, now that we've got everyone who requested telework and cited a high-risk concern, once we've got them handled, how do we reach into the brick and mortar to accommodate some of these students that are requesting telework? So the fact of the matter is that all of our instructors who need that protection through teleworking were afforded that, and we actually had to reach into the brick and mortar to accommodate some more of the student requests. And some of those instructors were willing to do either a hybrid or to transition to online to accommodate those things. So I feel very confident that we have all of our instructors taken care of with regard to their requested health needs. Now, I will say that there are others who opted to work in the brick and mortar and accept the risk, and we ensured that we would do whatever we could through appropriate social distancing, any type of accommodation that we can make to protect them for their high-risk status, that we would do that, and we've counseled our principals on that. But the fact of the matter is that many of them wanted to get back in the school and see their kids.
But so I want to clarify that then for my own needs. So you are saying then we do have high-risk individuals based on their health conditions that are still working in our brick and mortar schools.
That's correct, and we asked them to provide the documentation requesting that specifically, because as I said, the initial round was please identify any high-risk factors or anything that may qualify you for telework, and they did that. And then as we started making online assignments, we started getting emails that say, hey, I don't really think I want to do that. I'm going to miss my kids. I want to be in the classroom with those kids. And so once we had that in writing and we afforded them that opportunity, and as I said, we'll do whatever we can to make sure that this is a palatable situation for you, and that's where the various conversations with regard to the masks and the barriers and the different things that you've heard that we're doing at actual school facilities to assist with some of these things. That's when that comes into play.
And people make those choices, even members that are present here today.
That's
that may be
correct.
part of the special risk population.
Right.
But they make those choices, and so we can live with that.
And and that's the instructor side, and we've got some unique situations that we're working with regard to our support personnel as well. Some of them are able to do telework, some of their jobs just can't, and so we're looking for alternate ways for them to be able to still impact the district if they can. If they absolutely cannot, then we're working with them on what that looks like in their absence. But we have, both of the unions and I have gotten into conversations about, so what do we do within job descriptions if it just doesn't fit and we're trying to take care of employees, and they've all agreed that we can kind of manipulate job descriptions within the same salary area to A, take care of our schools, but also take care of our employees to the best degree we can. Simple fact of the matter is there are some things that just can't be accommodated through telework, and we're having to have some tough conversations with them, but that's been few and far between, and the superintendent has said we're going to try to figure out whatever we can to protect people. If we have to, if it gets down to it, then we'll have to make a tough decision, but right now we're working with employees the best we can to afford accommodations any way we can, but still keep not only the district running efficiently and the schools running efficiently, but also to make sure that anything that's going undone at the school isn't an undue burden on some other employee that's there.
Yes, thank you, Doctor.
All right.
Makes
I
me
have
feel
something,
better.
I do
please.
too.
Okay, so
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Ivanchek, you'll go first, and then Dr.
Okay.
Kelly.
All right. On the hybrid model, particularly I'm thinking on the secondary, I don't know if you have to give me an exact number, but there's quite a few I'm hearing teachers who teach all day and then have the online. Is that correct?
I think there's quite a few
And they
hybrids,
get
folks,
the
yes.
sixth class, and of course that helps with, not having to hire. So, when they have this class online, that adds quite a bit to their workload, doesn't it?
So I might have to ask Ms. Lightbourne to come up and talk. Ms. Lightbourne was working with the unions and the work groups
Sure.
on the My School Online option, the brick and mortar option, and then, of course, the hybrid option to kind of make sure that all those things are palatable and commiserate and
Right.
equitable among teachers, but I don't have the specifics,
Okay.
and she may be able to speak to
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hey. So we have two kinds of hybrid models.
Right.
Okay, so there's one where, in order to make a teacher whole, because of the numbers that have gone out of the brick and mortar, a teacher might have 3 periods brick and mortar and 2 periods online. So that is currently occurring. Their model and their time is a little bit different than a full-time online teacher. The full-time online teacher can have more students and have more responsibility as far as contact time goes, because they're available. That was done through the work group that I think I had presented you guys the full online. So we have that going on. We do have some teachers in order to cover all of the online that we needed, and so they might have 3 classes brick and mortar and 3 classes online. So in that situation, they do have a 6th subject, and they are paid extra for that 6th subject. So that is occurring, but when they're blended, they are to contact the parent and let the parent know I'm a blended teacher, so we'll be following the brick and mortar schedule of every other day contact, just like we are doing brick and mortar, because if that teacher is teaching, so if it were you and you have 135 brick and mortar and then 24, which is on Tuesdays and Thursdays online, then 135, we can't expect that teacher to go beyond their 7.5 hours on that day. So they would be doing their time on those every other days.
Gotcha.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it does. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay.
Dr. Kelly?
So my question was pretty simple. No, it was for Lee probably,
Okay.
but you're more
Stay
than
just in case.
I'm sure you have a contribution. So my question was just with regard to somewhat related to COVID, with the Destin High School students, have we been able to accommodate all of those students since their school wasn't able to open? I know we had said prior to that they would be counted in the FTE just in the event that that school didn't happen on time. And I was just wondering if we had, in registration, if we had
and
accommodated
I'm pausing
those
for a
students.
second, because and then we'd have to double check that, but I think the bottom line would be those students have already either enrolled in
Into
our
their zone
schools or
student.
on the online program.
And that was, my presumption was, I
Yes,
know
ma'am.
prior to all of that unveiling of the school, when that was being talked about, we had said that those numbers would be calculated into their regular projected school. So, just want to be sure that all students are taken care of.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anything else, Dr. Kelly?
Nope, that was it.
Mr. Destin?
I just want to thank Sheila and all the folks that have been working on this. As we all know who follow the news, one of our adjoining counties laid off 80 teachers and reassigned 80 more without going where they didn't want to go. We have not come to that, and we have them to thank for that so far. And this is really still an ongoing process. The decisions we make on the masks, the decisions we've made on the barriers are going to determine between now and the 31st how many choose not to come back. And so their task is still not done and won't be done for a bit yet. So I wanted to thank them for the fact that we've not laid anybody off so far.
Right.
And we've not had a lot of reassignments that people didn't want. And that alone is a lot to be proud of.
That's right. And Mr. Destin, also, I think our instructional staff, our teaching staff, for being so flexible and being so open and fluid with whatever we ask them to do. So I think we owe our teachers a big thanks, and I've heard you thank the unions as
Absolutely.
well. But
This is a new world for them too.
Mhm, absolutely.
Well, and I agree with Mr. Destin there. In light of what you see across the country, we are very blessed that we have been able to work with our unions, our teachers, everybody, and everybody has come together understanding that this is unprecedented, and you know, we're going to work together, we're going to get through this. But I would definitely say that, you know, Okaloosa County has stepped up to the plate once again and shown what it's like when you work together instead of working against each other, and we're able to accomplish amazing things. And you know, moving forward, I think we're going to prove the state that we can do this. All right, so we're down to section 10, discussion agenda. 10.1, items moved from the consent agenda. At this time, there is none. So we are at 11, construction program owners representatives business, and 11.1, program status report. Mr. Destin.
Thank you, Chairman. We are still working on all of the agenda items that we presented at the last meeting. They're all moving forward at a proper pace. We have a couple of things on this morning that are associated with those, and then Mr. Horton will talk to us about an even more complicated issue, the half-cent sales tax list. So
Okay.
that's all I have to report this morning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Destin. And so we do have a couple items we'll be voting on Monday night. So 11.2, authorization for professional services agreement from Faithful and Gould for price validation for program number 6, task order number 8, Kenwood Elementary School kitchen dining roof replacement scope modification, owner directed change order. And that's presented by Dr. Bill Smith, and he is in the audience if we have any questions. And then 11.3, the district proposed half-cent sales tax capital project plan. And Mr. Horton, if you would like to make your way up, I'm sure, or Mr. Chambers.
And I'm just going to say just a couple of things, and as Mr. Horton comes up, I think, as you know, we've worked with our schools. We've worked with Jacobs Titan in terms of getting a list of capital project needs at each school. And I know Mr. Horton, Dr. Smith, they've also done a great job of working through this process. So I think the list that you're going to see that every school, if we were fortunate enough to get this half-cent sales tax, would be receiving some upgrades, some improvements. And I'm not talking necessarily just luxury updates. It's, some of it is just things that have to be done when you're talking about 61% of your buildings being 50 years of age or older, and 75% of them being 45 years of age or older. So you'll see some needs there. This list also takes into account growth across this school district. I think the last 5 years, we've had about a 1.5% growth in students, which is almost 400 to 500 students. And I mention that because I think one of the things that part of this discussion today and maybe even Monday is, we have to look at how big is too big in a school. Destin Elementary, how big is too big? Should we have elementary schools getting towards 1,200 as growth increases? Davidson Middle School, do we want Davidson Middle School to be about 1,500, 1,600, as time goes on? And we know Ruckle is a big school, Blue Water. You look at capacity, and one of the things that I've learned that I did not know is a lot of times when you get to approximately 80% capacity within a school, in other places they start looking to build a new school. And Mr. Horton will correct me if I'm wrong, the vast majority of our schools are well over 80% capacity, and some of them are over 100% capacity. So I say all that to say, part of this discussion today is the needs, that the critical needs that we have at schools, and then we have to look at where we would potentially build new schools in Okaloosa County. And the building new schools, as we have it set forth, would not come from the half-cent sales tax money. And then Rita would be prepared to talk a little bit about that as well. Also, some of the needs that you'll see on there, especially when it's the high school, I think those of you who've been at the high school, all the different activities that happen after school and the challenge for space, whether it's athletics, whether it's the cheer, the dance, which they're absolutely athletes, whether it's band, there's so much of a clamoring for space, which it gets very difficult. So you'll see that's something that was taken into account as well. And I just appreciate the work that Mr. Horton has done, Dr. Smith has done, working with Jacobs Titan as well. And so I just wanted to give that brief intro. And Mr. Horton, if you'd come on up.
While he's coming up, the information we got for each school, I think you said this, let me make sure. The schools gave this input, right?
And
Each school gave the input for the list, correct?
Absolutely. Every
Yeah.
school was a part of the
Yeah.
process, and Mr. Horton will probably talk about that a
Okay.
little bit as well.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. And so a lot of information to talk about today, and certainly a lot of questions to answer and have asked, so I'm happy to do that. One of the things I just want to front load with you on is that Jacobs Titan and the representatives who worked on this project with us will be here Monday night for additional questioning and be able to speak to it, and we'll make sure that we're available for each of you individually to have time to sit and look over these pieces. So if you recall, back in January, or actually in March, we came to the board and presented, it was about 3.5 hour presentation and on the capital projects and the process that we're going through to identify those needs for a potential half-cent sales tax. And so at that time, back in January, Ms. Ivanchik, you're exactly right. We met with each school with the team from Jacobs Titan. We brought our own facilities folks too, and looked at the needs within the school from a principal perspective, from the school advisory council chair perspective, who were also invited to those meetings, and accumulated a master list of projects. And some of them more critical than others, but nonetheless a master list. And I think at that time in March, I reported to you that project list was in the neighborhood of $480 to $500 million in cost. And I think we all knew going into this process, if we were fortunate enough to receive sales surtax funds for 10 years, that they would likely not be enough to solve all the ills in the district that have accumulated over the past 20 years. And so that's kind of an acknowledgement going into this process. When we looked at, and we came to you in March and looked at what other districts have done over the last 15 years to address their capital needs, we saw and reported that most districts, almost every district has alternate sources of revenue coming into the district in support of or in addition to what we refer to as the 2 mil money, which is what all districts receive based on local property taxes. So as a district, we realize that Other districts have found funding sources, and many of them voter approved, obviously, and felt like it was a critical point in our history with the growth that we experienced and with the condition and aging of our buildings that we look, potentially to the voters for that source. So what's created for you today is a coffee cup, one sheet of project lists at each school that had significant input from the principal, and then was blended in with, obviously, facility needs. So where the principal may or may not believe or think off the top of their head that an HVAC chiller or boiler replacement was critical. When you start to talk about the different calls that they've had to place for air conditioning not working, I know that Fort Walton Beach High Schools has made it through potentially 6 phases of a 10-phase HVAC completion that's been put on hold for the last several years. And so the facilities department and Dr. Smith and maintenance have blended in with these principal inputs and SAC chair inputs to come up with project lists that we believe is a responsible and forward-thinking use of potential taxpayer-approved revenue sources. So with that said, these projects were produced. Now, I want to make sure everyone's aware and understands that there's a lot behind these projects. So the first question that might be asked if I'm sitting at the sitting with my cup of coffee is, well, what are the costs of all these, and how do we determine what those costs are? And that's what our total project manager, Jacobs Titan, has expert experience over multiple years, including the last sales tax program in Okaloosa County at developing these costs. So rest assured that those are available, those are there, and they're not on this particular document today because I wanted to make sure that in talking with those groups that everyone could see the projects for what they are, and then be able to get into the details of the cost as time moved on. Certainly it's the case when you look at a Meigs Middle School that's one of our older middle schools and it's a ramp school. When you look at the needs of that school compared to, say, the needs of a Riverside Elementary that was built this century, they're going to be different. Their enrollments, Riverside has more kids, but it's a much newer facility, and it was built with 21st century in mind. And so, when you start to look at dollar amounts per school and per student, it becomes complicated because it's clear that in some schools more is needed just to get that school up to a level of where it's more functioning. And so that's a component as well. The other thing that I would say, and Mr. Chambers alluded to this, is that we said back in March in that presentation, to quote Mr. Chambers, how big is too big on some places? So right now, for example, Destin Elementary, recall as a K4, not a K5, is our largest elementary school in the district. So that's an issue. And the 5th grade already being at Destin Middle. So in that area, those two schools are at and beyond capacity. That's occurring in other places as well, as evidenced by portables in our building. And so the question that we posed back in March and have been asking all along is, there is a tipping point at which time when you look at 4 or 5 different campuses, maybe whose footprint is not designed to get any bigger, and you start to look at adding wings to them and expanding cafeteria and expanding media centers and other things in a school, and you start to look at the aggregate cost of doing that across 3 or 4 schools, and then you look at the cost of potential new construction, where you can really be forward thinking and say this is a better solution for the next 10 to 15 years. And when that cost starts to align, because it is expensive to do wing additions and to do cafeteria expansions and those sorts of things, when those two costs align, I think that's when it's prudent to look at new construction. And as you know, we have not had any new construction in terms of complete campuses, I think, since 2007. 2007. And so we watch to the west and the east of us as new schools are built, and they look palatial, and all districts are growing. So I think that's what the superintendent's directed me to do, is make sure we're investigating that piece. So what you won't see on these project lists right now, let me say one other thing if I could. So the COVID piece is more than just about masks. So COVID has caused us to think about lots of things long-term. So we say that 25 to 30% of our students are going to My School Online this fall, which is going to make our school buildings a lot less crowded to begin the year. What we don't know is, once COVID ends, what does that mean for that 25 to 30%? Do 5% of our 30% decide that online is the way that they like to do their education? And so those who maybe have not ever dipped their toe in the water now are going to say, well, I'll just continue with an Okaloosa online model because I don't foresee My School Online. That was kind of an emergency model that many districts implemented, but it's probably not something feasible going forward. We would probably use an Okaloosa online model that's more traditional. But what does that look like? And what does that do to our enrollment growth? Is it a one-year hiccup? Is it something that carries forward? So that is a complicating factor in discussions about expanding, whether it be wings or school buildings. But nonetheless, the project list that you see here, I believe, is not impacted by that factor. And so Mr. Chambers mentioned that the sales surtax money, which is expected to bring in about $230 million, would provide funding for all the things that you see on that project list. And again, Jacobs Titan will be here Monday night to speak to that in more detail. The things above and beyond that the district needs requires a separate plan, and it might be a parallel plan. And so we've said that what we're trying to do is correct and remediate the things that we've been needing to do for the last 20 years. And it's not me, it's not you, it's not the superintendent. When you look at it and you see, we presented this in March, the funding streams that other districts have that are making use of, and we just have not had the availability to have the past 20 years. And Dr. White has mentioned before, there was a sales tax effort a decade or so ago that did not succeed. Had it, we may not be in the exact place that we're in today. So the project list that you have that I'll be happy to answer questions regarding, I think addresses some important things. It addresses security and safety. It addresses, in places where it's appropriate, it addresses growth. And so it may be there are areas of the county where it's not appropriate to look at a new school, but it may be appropriate to put a small classroom addition. If a cafeteria is being expanded or turned, or a cafetorium is being built, then you can make use of that existing cafeteria space and go ahead and add classroom space there. So there was some of that in those plans, but in general, safety and security, renovating these old facilities. You will see a page on here for school buses. I think that is part of the referendum and part of the half-cent surtax question. We do have the oldest bus fleet in the state. We just got some feedback, I think, that says it might be appropriate to refresh our buses at a 12 to 15 a year rate. I think the proposal here contemplates 10 a year, which over time would get us in a very good shape with our bus fleet. As you know, very, very few of our buses are air conditioned. We have some of our ESE buses, our special needs student buses, are air conditioned, but the other ones by and large are not. And you know, in Northwest Florida, it's more than just August and May where you have to worry about hot buses. And so that is a big issue, and let alone the condition of the buses as well. So that's part of the plan. The other thing that I would say about this, and then I'll open up to questions, certainly is just to be clear that this list, these items were established at the school level by school principals and the groups that they brought in to discuss those, and district folks. And so I want to make sure we're very clear about that. And then the other thing is, it is obvious, it is clear that schools are not able to have everything on their list. And so it's also clear that you know, sometimes there's disagreements over what should go on the list and what should not be on the list. And that's part of life as it relates to this.
Or who got what.
Or who got what. which is the other piece. And so going back to the Meigs and the Riverside example, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it would be very, it could be the case that there start to be phone calls going back and forth about, this school got X number of dollars, this school got X minus $1 million, or whatever, and why is that? And so I think it's a fair question. I think the answers speak to the conditions of the school, the needs of each school, and so it can never, I don't think, please everybody, but I think that this project list is a good beginning to a fall. Yes, sir.
But Mr. Horton, I think in one way you already spoke to that. I think if I heard you correctly, the initial list approached $500 million.
Yes, sir.
And the reality is that even if we should be so, I'll use the word blessed, by the public with this funding, it's only about half of the original list. So obviously you and your group and all the folks involved in this had to do some kind of prioritizing of those needs that clearly are there, but as a former superintendent long ago, and for many people, they won't even know what I'm talking about. He used to say, it's not all you can eat at Howard Johnson's anymore. And there's just not enough funding there to do all that.
Right.
So,
Well, and I like the fact that you did say in a different way, but I'll try to be more succinct, that some buildings just don't need as much as others. So what we're doing in essence is trying to bring them all up to a certain standard. Some might need this much, some might need that much.
Yes, ma'am. And to your point, the principals of those schools understand that. And so I could stand before you and say that in those schools that are newer, that maybe have fewer needs, those principals have been magnanimous and to a person have said, we know we can do with less. And so it really falls back to them because they are the ones who kind
They're very
of take up that
collegial.
mantle.
And the second thing, I appreciate that there are no costs on there, because I understand that by the time we get to the point of actually building, all those costs will have fluctuated and changed, and it might not be prudent today. It might be a different cost factor a year from now.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You're exactly right. And one of the things that in coming up with that original $500 million price tag on all of these components, you're right. That's our cost estimate now. And Jacobs Titan has been doing this for a long time. So
good.
I have a level of confidence in what they're telling us, because this project list is one that they believe that we can get accomplished through a surtax. And sometimes, and I wouldn't ask Rita to speak to this, but sometimes in a normal environment, the sales tax revenue that comes in over 10 years often exceeds what the projection is. And I say often, we're in a COVID environment now, so it's difficult to even think about what the sales surtax might be next school year, what the tax revenue. So hopefully, we can get through this, because it would have an impact on this particular project.
Yes, I didn't see anything on here, but I wanted you to address the thing about, we want to move towards getting our portables out, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, I know some of these, as we add facility, will do that. And so, was that a goal when you were looking through this, to get away from portable usage as
So,
much
yes,
as we
ma'am,
can?
that was something that we talked about, and that goes hand in hand with new construction. So when you don't see wings put on buildings here with the purpose of removing portables, the idea would be, as we move and look at construction, that would be the way to remove portables. And I think we also said back then, with the number of portables we have, it's not something where we'd be able to kind of do this and remove all portables and build. And in some places, to be honest, we have some schools whose enrollment is flat, whose enrollment, certainly COVID being an awkward year, but we're seeing fewer kindergartners this year coming in. And I'm expecting that there might be a bunch of parents out there who are saying, maybe we'll just sit it out a year and we'll start next year and see what it looks like. And so in some buildings, in some locations, you're seeing not as many classrooms in portables. And so I want to be clear about the whole portable situation is, I wouldn't, and I wouldn't expect the superintendent would recommend we build a wing to remove portables if these two portables were being used by, our itinerants as office space or something along those lines, because I think, we're trying to work to have students removed from portables in classrooms. But to your point, construction would alleviate those portable issues in many places.
And to follow up, Mr. Horton, I think that's valuable analysis, because the last time that we successfully did this and removing portables was a goal, there was no burden of constitutional language regarding class size. And so that made it a little bit easier to accommodate the removal of all of those portables. The second piece of that is that, in fact, there was an example of a school that we did successfully build a new wing to and removed 13 portables. But because of enrollment, as you're suggesting, that school has now been closed and no longer even exists on that plot of land. So I appreciate you looking forward, thinking at enrollment and what can happen at these schools. And so I think you're right. We have to be judicious in how we look at that.
Yes, sir. And then just kind of speaking a moment more about potential construction pieces, I thought, and superintendent kind of instilled in me in this, and I've heard board members speak to this in public meetings, that I think a half-cent surtax, it is very important for all schools to benefit from it, all schools to receive significant projects. And so I would not propose to you that half-cent surtax money be directly used to construct 2 schools here or a school there. I think that we've been saying for a long time, and it's true, and we want to make sure our current schools, and not anticipating closing any of them, but our current schools are brought to a level where they are, they're things that we can be proud of. So as Mr. Chambers said, the thought of additional schools, I think we as a school district, I hope we as a school district, if the people listening probably didn't hear that.
God's telling you something right there, Steve.
So we as a school district
I didn't even see it.
continue through our 2 mill money to do things that we need to do. And board members are aware that we're finishing in the next year or two paying off debt for the last some last construction that was done. And so I believe that the district is, if the surtax is passed by the voters, the district is possibly in a good position to be able to do some very forward thinking as it relates to constructing some new schools. And I think that and I've had a chance in the year and a half within the facilities department to look at the capital outlay budget, and you'll see that as an item further down the agenda. But I'm confident that if the board is of a mind, and if the citizens approve this surtax, that we'll be able to do so much in this school district. It will reduce our ongoing maintenance and some of the things that we have to budget for each year. But it will also give us the flexibility to do some things with our own 2 mill money to be partners in this project. And at the end of the day, it's all taxpayer money. And so it all has to be spent judiciously and in the best way possible to the betterment of the kids and the teachers and the families. But I think that we're poised here if the surtax is able to be passed to really chart a course for Okaloosa schools for the next decade or 2.
Mr. Destin?
Thank you, Chairman. As board representative to the construction maintenance people, I've been in on a number of these meetings, and I want to tell you that Jacob Titan has a very well thought out, robust plan, recommendations, complied with Mr. Horton and his group for new construction. And as Mr. Horton said, those 2 were parallel. In my opinion, they're more than parallel, they're joined at the hip. Without the surtax, the new construction can't happen, because we estimate to go forward with the entire program is about $500 million. The sale tax will generate $250. We can do the other half. But if the sales tax doesn't pass, then we will have to use our half to keep the schools from falling down around our ears. And I spoke to Superintendent last night, and we're going to have them come and give us a presentation. This half cent is not just what we see on the half cent ballot. It is the key to everything we need to do to bring the district forward for the next 10 years. We do have some needs, some very big needs, as we spoke about the Destin Elementary. There are 700 to 900 residential units permitted and under construction in Destin. Those are apartments and townhouses who young people with families will most likely move into if half of those families have one child. You're talking about 300 more kids for Destin Elementary. They have a very good plan about putting, and they have the property there, of putting a pre-K through 2 section on some of that property that's available, and taking the pressure off of that, and may even take pressure off of Destin Middle School by being able to bring maybe a grade back. We have the same situations in the north end. Some of those schools, we're going to have to do new construction. There's no doubt about it. In the middle section too, we've got some needs for new construction. Without the half cent, that can't go forward. And so I know that our partners at the Chamber and Ms. Anker's group need to go forward with a plan so that they can start campaigning. But we need to make it clear to everybody that this plan enables new construction. The last time this passed, they had a component of new construction in it. This does too. While they may not be tied directly to the half cent makes it possible. They can't happen without it. And that's a very important argument and understanding we need the public to get. While a lot of the stuff on our list is keep the building from falling down on us, if we don't get that money, then the nicer, brighter things can't happen. And so I look forward to having Jacob Tidens tell us about some of those really nice ideas, and so that the people understand it's a package deal. You're not just voting to fix roofs and HVAC and get rid of some portables possibly, but you're voting to carry the district forward for the next 10 years. And without that component, I fear about our ability to pass it, but it is a very real and a big part of what we're doing.
And I would just say that, piggybacking off of what Mr. Destin said, this is an investment for the future. And looking at it from a private side, which I came from before I was on the school board, it's easy for a business to raise the price of goods to be able to accommodate their expansion or, build new buildings and all that. But we don't have that luxury. We could, but none of us up here are going to raise the taxes or anything. We're going to operate within our means. With that being said, there is some concerns, or just looking at some of the schools that we have now, as far as would it be feasible to close those particular schools down and rebuild a brand new school instead of putting money into a school that's like Meigs, for instance, that's 60 plus years old, and we do have room next to it where the stadium is, something like, and just build a new school, or next to Shalimar, I believe we have property there. But to be able to build a brand new school instead of putting money into something like Dr. White said, you put money into something and we end up closing it down, are we being very good stewards of taxpayer dollars? And from what I hear, y'all are looking at things like, is it going to be better just to build a brand new school instead of sinking money into a school that's crumbling away?
Yes, sir. That's a very good question. I'm sure you guys and ladies get asked that question. So usually in a situation like that, Meigs has just undergone its single point of entry piece, and so there's some significant work that was done in the name of school safety there. When you talk about that, I think it would have to be a very, very dire situation, because the cost of building a new school on the location where you might be doing some renovation of another one, those are kind of orders of magnitude different. And so we say there's significant funds going to MEGS. It is, and I'll let Jacob Staton speak to that, but it's nowhere near the scope of what of a tear down and new construction would be. And so when you look at an area like Shalimar, and it could be anywhere, we're actually seeing MEGS enrollment uptick a little bit. I say it's the Tracy Lamb effect there, Miss Lamb, the principal, but looking at the feeder paths, Elliott Point and Shalimar, their enrollment's holding right now. And so, in some ways, some of Fort Walton Beach is kind of getting a younger demographic, and as they're moving in, and you're looking out by the mall where they've got large number of apartment complex coming online. So I think generally speaking, where unless it's dire and the building is in a shape where it needed to be condemned or something, we'd probably, and again, we're looking at growth projections over time. So unless we see a downward like this in enrollment, I think we would probably just work and renovate the building we have.
Well,
Would be my thought.
And there are other older schools, and I
Sure.
hate to call names, but Wright Elementary, for example, or even Pryor Middle School. Those schools are close to the same age as MEG's middle school. So I think your money would go pretty quick if you looked at replacing schools and all the other needs and all the other kinds of things that Mr. Destin was talking about. You just wouldn't be able to do those.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, I understand. I did have one more comment, Mr. Bryant,
Yes.
if I might, if you're ready to move on.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that everyone heard and understands that there are financials that accompany this list, that there are real numbers attached to all of these projects that are listed under every school, and that those will be available. Is that, I understand that correctly?
That is correct, and that's what Jacobs Titan is excellent in. I'm a math teacher, but they know the construction business, so those are there, the underlying financials. Yes,
Very
sir.
good, because one of the criticisms I've heard is that we haven't produced financials, that all we've produced is a want list, and that's just not accurate. That there are real numbers, real financials associated, line item, with each one of these projects that will be available for those individuals that would like to look at that. And everyone should be confident that these aren't magic numbers, these are real numbers attached to these projects.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Very good.
Yep.
And I agree with Dr. White there, showing those numbers, because I just sat here and said it's an investment. And if I'm a stockholder in a particular entity, I want to see the numbers and how that's going to affect us in the long run. And I think that will help, ease some concerns about just our wish list. Yeah, we can throw that out there, but if we have the real numbers, and of course, Rita would be able to talk about how all that money is divvied up in our $430 million budget. So that could help us get that message across that you're taking a vested interest. This is where your money's going to go, and we're going to do our best to be good stewards of that. So
Yes, sir.
So I agree with Dr. White. It's imperative that we put that out there.
You recall that 3.5-hour presentation back in March? Do you remember? It went like that for me, but a lot of what you're referring to in terms of the budget coming from the state and the TUMO money, we kind of went through slides on that, and I'll make sure that it's certainly under board docs, but make sure we put that up on our facilities page,
Right.
and everybody can see that presentation as well.
Right, and the numbers associated
With
with
these.
these projects at these schools, so that the I believe, unfounded criticism is that it'll be evident that there are real numbers attached to these projects and
Yes, sir.
figures, even though we already know that some of those numbers are going to total more for some places than others. It's the way it works.
And Dr. Smith has been great. He's been joined at the hip with Jacobs Titan this week, and so he's my point person for making sure that we get that information and put it in a presentable way so that people can see those numbers.
Excellent, very good.
I have one more thing, please.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Fancher.
And I think that's very good that Dr. White brought that out, because that's very important. But one other thing I'm asked as a board member by citizens, and I know we could spend a lot of time on this, but maybe just briefly, is how did we get here? What have we been doing with the money that we, to have this problem? Now, part of it is, I want to say, look, this is where we are, and we can show you where we are. And I don't know that a long history lesson of how we got there makes a difference, because I feel like, you know, you got to go with where you are. But just briefly, and I'm not as well spoken on the financial piece as certainly you are, Mr. Horton and Ms. Scallon, but I do believe it's worth saying briefly that revenues over the past years coming from the state have been cut. So we've not had the money. Is that correct? I'm going to let you kind of pick it up from there of what to say, what you would say to the public about, you know, we're not going on cruises with any extra money. The bottom line is we've lost revenue to do some of the things, and we've had to put a Band-Aid on things that truly needed surgery.
So I'll speak in general terms, and then if Ms. Scallon wants to follow up on it. So you might be referring to the 2 mil capital outlay money that comes in, which is our primary source for funding capital projects and our maintenance. And that had been cut twice at the state level by $0.25 mil, and so it's now really 1.5 mil, which is $1.50 for every $1,000 of your property taxes that you and I pay. But I don't even use that as an excuse per se. So that has decreased the amount of funding that we would have otherwise received under a true 2 mil. But all the other districts took a haircut in the same way. And so if it was equal across the state, then we wouldn't have any more reason to kind of feel the pain. What I said earlier in this was that if you look across the state, the other districts have not been able to figure it out and survive the way we have for the past 15 or 20 years. They've all reached out to their voters and have been successful to help with additional funding sources. So yeah, the 2 mil money is really 1.5 mil now, but that happened to everybody. I think in our district, we have significant portions of our capital budget that comes in every year. We've been using $6+ million, as much as $9 million, I think, at one time, of that money to pay for the schools that we built before. Well, that's money that is not used for maintenance and other ongoing roofing needs. We capitalize, and all of our technology in our school district, there's a cost to that. And so that comes out of our capital budget before we get to repair the first roof. Maintenance transfers is a capital expenditure that's eligible that districts across the state use with us. And so there are simply more needs than funds available. And I get it, because I work on a budget, and so when you see dollars and budgets out there in the millions, it's easy to get caught up in and it's understandable to say, that's a lot of money, you ought to be able to do that. And then when you look at the cost of fixing something, repairing a roof, and it's a $1.4 million to do one roof, part of a roof at one building, that's when you start to see the other side of it. But I don't know if I answered your question or just
Yes,
rambled.
and another point too is, and I know Dr. White and some of us have grown up here, there was a time frame of maybe 10 or more years where a lot of schools were built, and those now have come of age, so to speak. So when you have a lot of buildings that are all old, then it takes a lot more on a yearly basis to keep them sustained and usable. So it's kind of like if your refrigerator, washer, dryer, car, everything kind of goes out at the same time, it takes a lot of money at one time to get into that. And so we've had to put a little bit here to keep each thing going. And now it's time that we're to a point, like you said, of crossing that to where it has to all be the big picture looked at. So that's another thing, to people look back at the history of this school district. There was a time when there was a lot of building going on in between, and Dr. White can probably help me, around about mid-60s into the 70s, at least a 10 to 15 year time frame, and they're now aging.
Right, and the older things get, the more repairs and the more
Certainly.
things that have to be done with them. And we used to receive a special federal impact aid for construction, and that's what it was used for. And of course, that stopped long ago. I guess the thing is that I think that you've all done the best you can in trying to put these resources together. And then beyond that, there's another cost that we have now that we didn't have back in those days. And hey, it's significant, and it's a reality of where we are, and that's technology. It's a huge cost that we really have no choice, that we've moved into that world, that back in those days when they built those old buildings, they really didn't have to worry about or think about that the way that we do now.
Yes, sir.
So,
And then to piggyback on that, the security piece.
Yeah.
Our view of security now is completely different than it was 10 years ago. And so I do want to mention something about these project lists. And so you'll see single point of entry on several of those. You won't see it on others, and it's because the board took the action 2 years ago to begin those single point of entry projects and not wait on anything. And so we have kind of cannibalized some of the capital budget to make sure we do those things as a priority. Those have been done in schools where you don't see it on the project list. The second thing, a question was asked of me, well, what happens if something on this project list gets done this fall or has been done? Or let's say a roof collapses, it's actually on this list and it's got to be done in an emergency manner. Could these project lists ever change? Well, in that kind of scenario, it could, and we would absolutely notify folks if that were to happen. One of the things is the single point of entry projects. We're going to ask the board to contemplate continuing to move in that direction this fall and not wait on the sales surtax. There are some schools out there where it says single point of entry project there, but if we can get the board's approval and move ahead with some of those, and Mr. Dessens led that in the construction meeting, we will pull some things off of this project list, which is only a good thing, because then it would allow us maybe to go to the next item on the list for a particular school or something in that, if that makes sense.
And that's a very good point, Mr. Horton. 50% to 2/3 of the security upgrades that are study groups and that the sheriff's department and that we all believe need to be done are still not funded without this half cent. That would have to come out of our own money and would, of course, have a severe impact on the other things that need to be done with that money. So I don't know how we can stress anymore how important it is that this pass from all of these different angles. So, it's good that people understand what's at stake.
And I just wanted to add one thing to Ms. Ivanchek's question earlier, which I think was a good question. And Mr. Horton, if you would kind of also address the amount of dollars that we spend in Okaloosa County FTE-wise and on capital projects, maybe versus some other counties based on their additional revenue sources.
So you put me on the spot here, so I'm not going to be able to say it exactly, but I think it was part of that March presentation. What happens is a good metric to look at is dollars, capital dollars expended per unweighted FTE, which is essentially per student. And so when you have a county that has fewer students but more capital dollars, and you look at that dividend there of maybe $1,500, $1,800, $2,000 per student spent in capital expenditures per unweighted FTE, then you look at Okaloosa, and it's a tenth of that. It's 300. That was the one. I attended one of the meetings that Ms. Ankers and their group had out in the community, and that was the thing that they were most shocked by, is the expenditure level that we could, as Okaloosa County, make per student on capital compared to other districts. And I think what we shared with you is it's pretty telling. It's pretty telling. It's why you're seeing new schools going up east and west of us and nothing at this point in Okaloosa.
Well, there's 67 counties in the state of Florida. Us and Citrus County are the only counties that do not have any other funding piece besides what comes in on property taxes. And I agree, we have done our best to be good stewards of taxpayer money, like I've said, with what we've had. And again, it's a credit to everybody within the school district that Okaloosa County continues to be one of the top school districts in the state with what we have. But what could we be with that investment in the future if we had the schools that were up to date with technology and safety and having all those components in place for our students to be successful and our teachers to be able to pass that on to our students. So I just say that to the public out there that, you know, if, like Ms. Vanchek said, we're not going on any cruises or anything like that, but what we have done everything we can to provide a quality education, and all we're asking the public is to consider this investment. And like Dr. White said, we're going to show you the real numbers so you can see what your investment's going to get you over 10 years. So,
Bottom line, our students deserve this,
yes.
and our employees. Our buildings need to reflect our philosophy of being the best. Thank you, Mr. Horton.
That's a good way to end it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Horton. And one thing about workshops, we have great discussions, and this was a great discussion. So thank you, Mr. Chambers, for providing this information for us. So now we'll move on down to Section 12, Information Technology Seat Management Contract. 12.1, Task Order Number 2-161, Online Learning Preparation. 12.2, Task Order Number 2-162, Okaloosa County School District Outdoor WAP Installation. 12.3, Task Order Number 2-167, Northwest Florida Ballot AI Phone Project. And 12.4, Task Order Number 2-168, Bob Sykes Portable Project. And 12.5, Change Order 16 to the IT Seat Management Outsourcing Agreement, Contract Modification Agreement, Chromebook Seat and Support Pricing. Okay, and now we're to Mr. McInnes's business.
Just one item, Mr. Chairman, I need to request that you schedule a special board meeting to conduct an attorney-client session in regard to a matter of pending litigation. The case is pending in Okaloosa Circuit Court. It's case number 2016 CA001472F, and we would request that you schedule that meeting at 8 o'clock a.m. on September the 10th, which is your next workshop day, so
Okay.
that we have that meeting prior to the workshop.
School board members, are we good with that? Okay, so be.
And that's all I have today.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chambers.
All right. It seems like everything we talk about right now is COVID related, and that does dominate a lot of what we're doing right now. But I do want to share with the board that, you know, as we get closer to the start of school, you will start seeing more and more information coming directly from schools, and you're already starting to see that already. I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to see Antioch Elementary's video, where all schools are doing this, but Antioch Elementary, for example, they're showing parents through video what happens from the moment a student gets to school all the way to the moment they get back on the bus at the end of the day. So this particular video, which will be similar across the district, you know, it shows kids getting off the bus, the precautions that are there, they're coming in, you know, what if a student's coming to the front office during the school day, the cafeteria, the hallways. So the schools have worked really, really hard, and the principals have done a great job with staff to communicate with families so they have an understanding of what to expect. But I will say, just a little bit of a funny, we sent out the Antioch Elementary video, and I think it raised the gauntlet for the level of expertise of these videos. So the schools have done a great job with that. Ms. Lightbourne, Mr. Horton, Ms. Scallon, Dr. Hale have really also worked with each of these schools in their particular areas to make sure that we are ready for the start of this school year. Pre-planning will be here. Well, it's here. It's here. And you'll start seeing even more from trainings to informational meetings, from brick and mortar all the way to My School Online. So just so much, and I say this all the time, but so much has happened. If you remember, it was early July when the state said we were going to create these new options for families to be able to get funding for the year. So a lot has occurred in just a little over a month, and I just couldn't be more grateful. So I'm thankful.
All right, so anything else, Mr. Chambers?
That is it, sir.
Okay, so now we'll move to board members' announcements and requests for information, and I will start with Ms. Savancheck today.
Yes, thank you. Well, a lot of good things. I know that some of the teachers went back on their flex days this week, and what I'm hearing is all very good, and I know that coming through next week, I'm hearing they're grateful to have this time. I think it's important for everybody to have that kind of time to get back into something. There's just too many things that we just haven't had to do before, so I appreciate the district working that out. One thing I'd like to ask, and it's probably Dr. Hale, is I know we're using a lot of protocols to keep our classrooms clean and everything. Are we in good shape with having personnel like cleaners and so forth? We have enough of those in place at all the schools?
Now, you're talking about like a response team, is that what you're?
Not the response team, but just day to day. I mean, we're doing additional cleaning, and we have custodials, still some custodians, but we mainly have cleaners, right?
Right, well, we have custodial and
Cleaners.
cleaners at every school. We do have some jobs that remain to be filled. Many of them have to do with the response team and the additional things that we
Right.
put in place. Of course, if you'll know, it's not atypical of any other year. We're always searching for
Yeah.
cleaners and custodians and things like that. But beyond that, we've also had discussions with the unions that, you know, beyond just the routine cleaning and the things that occur in a custodial manner each and every day, that there's going to be a lot of teamwork with regard to even our other ed support staff, our teachers. Everybody's going to kind of hold hands and share the load for some of this new stuff, the sanitizing, the taking care of things in between classes and whatnot like that. And we've had both unions again, as we've been working through some of these things that we just kind of agreed to, as we agree that it looks different and we're just all going to have to step out of our comfort zone a little bit. And so whereas we do have some jobs that remain out there to be filled as every year, I feel confident that we have everything in place to take care of those needs.
And so that will be part of the training next week, correct? With the
Yes.
teachers to learn those protocols and what we're doing, right?
Yes.
Which is great. So that's
Yes.
why I'm so glad we have that time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah. That's all I have. Thank you.
Dr. Kelly?
Well, I would just say, if you saw my post, I visited 3 of our schools, and I will say I took my temperature and signed in and had my badge on and rang in, and they were following protocol. The teachers who were there working were delighted to be there because they're in their element. They're doing what they love to do. So it was delightful to see them happy and to be back where they belong. And I know their principals too. I saw all 3 principals. They were doing their thing and happily welcoming their faculties back. And I'll just end with congratulations, Mr. Chambers, and you can count on me to be a team player.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And Mr. Destin?
I don't think I have anything further today, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Destin. Dr. White?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to follow up on Dr. Kelly's remarks, we normally don't talk about politics up here on this dais, but the truth is, that's how at least 6 of us up here got here. And it may be the way some of us leave. But what I would like to say to you, Superintendent, is congratulations on a massive victory that I believe is an endorsement and certainly a mandate for your leadership and for your administration. And I'll just conclude by saying, let's move forward now.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
And in closing, I would just like to also congratulate Mr. Chambers. I look forward to working with him for the next 4 years. I'd also like to point out that I saw Mr. Sansom had put out a nice post yesterday about working together, so I'm encouraged that, you know, we're going to have a unified team moving forward, especially with the half-cent sales tax moving forward. So I'm really encouraged by that. And, you know, the other thing I would just like to say to the public out there is that, you know, like all of us up here, we truly care about what's going on out there. And, you know, like Dr. Kelly, myself, I've visited several schools over the last week, and our teachers, our principals, our support, everybody is excited to get back to normal, some type of normal. And it's encouraging to go into the schools. Like Dr. Kelly said, they're following the proper procedures. You know, I get temperature checked everywhere I go. I have my mask. If they, you know, if I can't social distance. So, but to see the reaction on the teachers and the principals, you know, they're ready and excited to get going on August 31st. So that's encouraging. And I would just encourage parents to reach out to your schools, and I'm encouraged by the videos that are going to come out. I got a glimpse of the Antioch video. So these are tools that we'll have in place to help educate our parents as we move forward. And as Dr. White said earlier, we are mandated to have schools open up. But with that being said, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that when we open up schools on August 31st, we're going to have everything in place to make it a safe environment for your students, for our teachers, for everybody that's involved. And so I'm excited to get to August 31st.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Bolton, I see you're out in the audience. If afterwards, if you would please just see me before you run off. Okay, so we do have 16, which would be public comment. This is the 2-minute version of the previous public comment at the beginning of the meeting. And we do have some public hearing on Monday night. So 17.1 will be public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 04-28, emergency operations, school safety and security. 17.2, public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 04-33, violent crimes, possession or use of tobacco products, alcoholic beverages, drugs, weapons, or firearms. 17.3, public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 04-32, discipline. And 17.4, public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 04-49, school threat assessment teams. And 17.5, public hearing for school district's 5-year capital outlay plan. And I'll go around the room. Mr. Horton, anything you'd like to add? Ms. Lightbourne? Dr. Hale? Ms. Scallon? Okay, this meeting's adjourned.